Hello, this is Laren with the Fantasy Grounds Academy. Today I'm going to be talking about the combat tracker and some of the options that go along with it. This is the DnD5e Ruleset, so if you're using Pathfinder or one of the other rule sets, some of the settings are similar, but they might be a little different because of the rules and how the rule set is written. So there is some differences there, but I'm going to go ahead and use the Fantasy Grounds DnD5e edition. That's the one I'm most familiar with. So let's go. So let's take a look at what I have set up here. So I have a map. I have the options open here, and you can find those over here on the right in the options area with this gear icon. Your actual table might look a little different depending on what theme you're using, but they're basically laid out the same. Up here is the combat tracker with these two swords that are crossed. So if you click on that, that will either dismiss it or bring it up. You can locate the combat tracker where you wish, but I usually have it up here on the left. I leave a little gap for my players up here on top. And then underneath here is the chat window, which you don't normally need the whole length of it. You just probably need 2 or 3 inches of it down here at the bottom so you can see the text. If you really have to, you can close the combat tracker and look up so you don't have to keep scrolling. And then you can just turn the combat tracker back on with the combat tracker button here on the far right of the interface. The next thing is if you have players that are completed, so if you go into the player section and then you click on characters, these are all the different characters that I have created for this particular campaign. This is basically a test character. This character is named Kalula. She is a 3rd level rogue. She is the fairy race, so she's kind of small. She does have flight. She has all her stuff ready to go. And on her actions tab, I do have some of the consumable items, her fairy her fairy racial features, potion of healing, and some of her rogue attacks and different features and effects. So she's all ready to go in case we need her. The next thing is I put them on the combat tracker, so any players that are going to participate in the game should be on the combat tracker. And then once you have them there, I have a map here of kind of like a forest map with a bridge going across the river. If you have your players ready, you could put them on the combat tracker and then take them and drag them over to the map. You can either do that by individually dragging the token itself, or you can also grab all of your characters as a whole, which would be down here at the very bottom. There's 3 factions. They might look like dragon heads or skulls or something, but they're all basically the same thing. So this faction, you can actually drag all the friendlies, all the neutrals, and all the hostile creatures at once if you want. And moving forward, Smiteworks is working on a plan to include the formation. So if you go to the party sheet, if you have your players on the party sheet, which I don't have yet, but I have her on here. But if you have more than one, you get an overview of all the different things that your players have. And on the order tab, they're actually going to clean this up. So when you use the formation on the map itself, like if you actually put your characters in a certain manner or a certain way, when you drag over the group on the map from the combat tracker, it'll actually take on that formation, which is kind of cool. A lot of people have asked me over the years why you couldn't do that. Well, now it's going to happen, but I don't know when. So it could be a month from now. It just depends on their production schedule and other priorities and such. But I think that's on the way. If you're unsure about what I'm talking about or want to know my source is, you go to the Fantasy Grounds forums, go to the laboratory, you can see they're kind of building on the infrastructure for that. So they're testing it out right now. So I imagine in the next few weeks or so, we'll probably see that. But that is a cool thing. So if you set up a certain arrangement of your party, it's no longer going to randomly just place them on here. You'll be able to use the party sheet to create your formation. So when you do drop your whole group on there, they're in a tight, area, not just spread out and random. So that's kind of cool. So anyways, enough of that. So we're going to go into actually some of the combat options that are available for the combat tracker and in the settings. So one of the things that you'll notice is that there are a ton of options. I'm not going to be able to go through all these, but I'm going to go through some of the most common ones that most GMs need to know about. So first things first is I have a dice tower here. It's kind of hard to see it, but it's down here at the bottom. It looks like a tower picture. It might be a different shape or a different color depending on your theme. In this case, it looks like a piece of parchment with a picture of a tower on it because I'm using the wizard theme. But if you're using some of the other ones, it'll look like a little icon. But nonetheless, this dice tower can be turned on in the options. So there's a little bit of behavior things I want to talk about with that. So I'm going to turn off the dice tower and the other dependent setting, which is show GM roll. So when you first start Fantasy Grounds, those are actually turned off. But when you turn them on, like let's say table dice tower, it's not going to show the dice tower immediately because it goes towards the players and you're not going to see it as the GM. So the default behavior is that, and then when you turn that on, your players will see it, and they can drag and drop their particular rolls inside of the dice tower, and they'll be hidden rolls, so only you can see it, not the other players. Also, when you roll into the chat area, which is like your dice tray, it's going to automatically make those rolls hidden because it's the way the behavior is set up in the options. Now, if you also want to see the dice tower and use it like your players and not just roll into the chat area, you can turn that on. And what that will do is it will make it visible on your table, but you have to use the dice tower for hidden rolls. So now if I do a roll in the chat tray, it will be open and everyone can see that roll. And then if you want to roll a secret roll, either from an NPC or from whatever source, you drag and drop that into the dice tower icon, and it'll be a dice tower roll. And you can see it's got this little eye with a slash through it. That means it's hidden. So there's some functionality there that you can either use it or you can turn it off for just you and have the players use it, whatever you want to do. But normally it appears over here on the very far right corner when you first start Fantasy Grounds. So when you turn it on initially, it's going to be over here in the bottom right corner. You're welcome to right click on it, unlock it, and that will basically allow you to move it because it's in a locked position when you first start. So if I right click on it and unlock it, I can drag and drop it anywhere I like. So I got it kind of closer to the dice, and then when I'm done positioning it, I can lock it. You can also lock the chat window. That's another window that you can unlock, and this modifier section down here. So if you don't want this in this bottom left corner, you can move this modifier section wherever you like. But I just kind of leave it all in one area. I think it's more convenient. It's really helpful. Also, as a player, since I'm going to be just using one player and I don't have multiple characters, I'm going to make some shortcuts for myself to make this easier. So here in the very center, if you double click on the initiative, it's going to roll the initiative and record that in the combat tracker. So that's a really nice function. It automatically takes in consideration your bonuses for your dexterity, so you don't have to calculate anything. And that would be basically how that's done. You can also, besides double clicking on it, you can drag and drop it into the dice tray. That'll do the same type of thing. Or if you want to bookmark it, you can single left click and drag, hold your left mouse button down, and drop it into one of the hotkeys below, which will allow you to save that particular roll. So when your GM says, hey, you need to make a initiative roll, you just single click on it and it rolls from the toolbar. Oh, what do you know? I got a 20. So when that happens, when you drag that, it pretty much stays that same way, that same state. It's not dynamic, it's static. So if your character changes and you get an ability score increase or you get some sort of boost from a magic item, you're going to have to re-drag that initiative roll to the hotkeys because it won't level up with your character, in other words. So it's based off of your dex bonus and those sort of things. So you want to make sure that you re-drag those occasionally so that the rolls are updated. The other thing I'm going to do is go to my abilities tab and take a look, and then I'm going to look at my skills tab. I'm going to go ahead and bookmark a couple of these skills. So you just double click on the total number. And what do you know? I got a 20 again. I'm really lucky today. So this is what you would normally do. And then you can also drag and drop this dice roll into this dice tray. And then you can also shortcut these. So I'm going to take my perception, which is one of the ones that gets used quite a bit. And then I'm going to take stealth. and maybe one other. I don't know, but let's see. Let me try that. Stealth, and then let's go with Thieves Tools, just in case I want to break into something. So there we go. So there's our shortcuts. This makes it so that I don't have to come back here every time when I use my most common skills. You might even do acrobatics, but you don't need to do all of your skills, just the top 2 or 3. That way your toolbar is not loaded with stuff. And then last but not least, I will be on the combat and actions mode. So on the bottom, you have a mode on your character sheet. So I want to change that to combat, and the display, I want to change it from group to actions. So this is where you want to be when you're getting ready to play. So most of your time will be spent like this in this state when you're a player. And the reason I do all this stuff ahead of time is to make it simpler and easier to find things, and I don't have to go through all these tabs on the right-hand side. So that's just a kind of a tip for your players, or for you if you're playing, to kind of make things a little easier on you. So the DM side of things is a little different. So I have a lot more view and control of the character. I usually have them stacked up here on the right-hand side of the combat tracker, so it's easy for me to drag and drop a dice roll into the chat area if I need to. It just makes it more convenient for me as a GM. And I also do the same for NPCs. So speaking of NPCs, on this map here, I have some gnolls that are set up already. They are technically already placed on the map. That's something you can do ahead of time. So if you have an encounter, which I have pinned one to the map, I'm going to open that up. So this is an encounter that has 4 gnolls on it. They are already flagged as hostile, so they'll attack immediately. If it's not copyright protected, you can unlock it. You can change the quantities if you want. I clicked on the refresh here so that it would give me the CR value and the experience points totals. And then here are these little check marks, which essentially places them on the map. So when you uncheck them, they're basically no longer placed. So if you hit the down arrow at this point, they're not on the map. They're just there in the combat tracker. You have to put them on the map yourself. So that might be something you would do for a random encounter that you just generate. So if I hit the down arrow, they're going to go over to the combat tracker, but they are not placed anywhere on the map yet, and they are default as invisible. So they're not even visible yet. The players won't know they're there right away. And until I make them visible, they're not going to be. So I can essentially take this faction button down here at the bottom where it says hostile, and drag and drop those and drop it into the map, and then make some slight adjustments as to where I'd like these NPCs to be before the combat starts. So that's one way to handle it. But I wanted to talk to you about some options that you have as the GM. So when you do that, when you click on an encounter and you open it up, you hit the down arrow, that's generally how you add everything to the combat tracker. Now you can pre-place these ahead of time, so you don't have to do that last step where I had to drag them over. Sometimes that can be disruptive during your games, depends on what's going on. It's not that big of a deal, but it is nicer when you can have them strategically placed where you want them to start. The other thing is there are some assumptions and some defaults that occur on the combat tracker when you are using Fantasy Grounds. So what you want to do is take a look at some of these options and see if they're going to work for you. So what I'm going to do is take a look at some of the default behavior. So I have the options up, and I'm in this combat section here. So there is an auto initiative setting that's set to group automatically. So when you add your enemies, if they're all the same type of enemy, they'll all go together on the same initiative order, and they all have the same hit points. So that is something that's default. So they're set up as group. So if I put a different type of creature on there, they'll have their own initiative, like maybe the boss, he'll have his own initiative, those sort of things. Now, the numbering is also another thing. It is set to append, which means every time you add a creature, it's going to increase that number. So we have 1 through 4 because there's 4 of them. If you change that append to random, it's going to add these in as if there are more or less combatants than there really are. So it's going to say number 12 of, and then the other one's going to be number 7, but actually you only have 4. So that helps with keeping the mystery of the encounter down, so people will freak out. So like, oh my God, there's one of 25. It'll be a random number instead of a actual number. And then you have the NPC roles, variable or fixed. So what this does is it takes the NPC stat block. So let's pull up a stat block. So I'm going to double click on the token for one of the nulls. I'm going to stick him in this area here so I can read this. And what that means here is that there is a default number that the damage will do depending on what the damage is. So for instance, the spear attack, if you have that on variable, it's going to roll 1d4 or 1d6 add +2 to the damage, or 1d8 if they're using it two-handed. So what you will need to consider is that with a character that only has 20 hit points, it's only going to take 2 or 3 of those to potentially kill that character. So if you turn on the actual variable here for NPC roles, variable or fix, put it on a fixed situation, what happens is it's always going to take the average number between that range. So if the average number between 1d8 plus 2, that's 10, so it's probably 5. I don't remember if it rounds up or down, but basically it takes the damage. So let's see what it does. So if this creature rolls an attack roll, it should be like 5 or 6, or the average. So let's drag and drop that and see what it does. So regardless of what I roll, it should be rolling just an average number if you have this set to fix. So that helps control the amount of damage. So if I let me drag and drop this from the actual null character stat block, and I'll drag it onto the Lula just to check it out. So here's the spear attack. It's 1d6 plus 2. So if I drag that on there, it's only 5. So that's how that works. So if you drag and drop it into the chat area, it doesn't trigger that option. You have to actually wound a character. So the next one should do the same amount of damage. So again, I'm going to drag and drop the damage on there. Again, it's 5. So what that does is it lets you know it's going to take 4 hits or 2 hits or whatever for whatever hit points they have. So I know that this NPC will do X amount of damage, and it will take 3 or 4 times for that creature to wound or to put her under or to kill her. So that is basically the nice part about that. The only time I'd use that is potentially if I had like a low level party and I was concerned about their survival. I might turn that on for the first couple sessions just so that I'll have a good idea of how much damage is going to happen to them. And when they actually are wounded, I'll know like, oh wow, that's only going to take 1 more hit. So I'll know when to pull the punches. Instead of relying on the dice roll, which is kind of an average, because the damage might be 10 in 1 roll. So that's what's the nice thing about that, is you can control the amount of damage if you want to. And then when you get into higher level play, or maybe once the characters get a little bit higher level, you can actually turn that off, go back to variable. And in this case, I'm going to go ahead and roll the damage again. It should be a different number than 5 unless I get lucky enough to roll 5 again. So if I drag and drop this onto the character, yeah, this time it did 4. So, it's kind of a risk, but, it's one of those things you can do to help your combat and make it a little bit easier. So the numbering thing, it comes in when you add the actual NPCs to the combat tracker. So I'm going to remove these temporarily. So if you go to the menu and you go to the garbage can, you have some options. So you can go to delete all non-friendlies, which deletes, the neutrals and the non-friendlies, or only hostiles. Well, we only have foes here. There's no neutrals, so I'll go ahead and just delete it. So that removes them from the combat tracker. Now, if I change this numbering here to random, it's going to assign different numbers. So let me try to bring those up again. And when I hit the down arrow, it's going to number them differently. Yeah, so it says 1, 2, 3, and number 5. There's only 4 nulls, but it gave it some bogus number. So it kind of throws your group off into how powerful the encounter is, so they can't judge it based on this number here. So that's kind of a cool feature if you have people that like to metagame, or perhaps they are constantly worried about the CR levels and that sort of thing. This will help you make that a little bit more of a surprise and not as predictable. So that's one of the things that I think is very helpful with this particular tool for the combat trackers. You can actually change that. So I'll just leave that away it is, but I'm going to go ahead and go to menu, go to delete. I'm going to delete them again because I want to show you some other options. So I'm going to go ahead and delete all the non-friendlies, which will include the hostile. So the next thing I want to do is show you that you can have also in your house rules down below, you can decide if your NPC hit points are going to be standard, maximum, or random. I happen to have it randomly set because I don't like it when they all have the exact same hit points. And for those people who have memorized every single or almost every single monster in the monster manual knows that these particular creatures usually start off with X amount of hit points. So I like to have that random. So instead of having the same number for every combatant, they're all going to have a rolled number of hit points, some low, some high, some in the middle. So that way, the people who are playing can't predict it, and it gives the combat a little bit more realism in far as like who's tougher and that sort of thing. So that kind of is unrealistic if they all have the exact same hit point. So I'm going to go ahead and add that here. So I'm going to turn that on to random. And then for the option for the numbering system, I'm going to go back to, I'll keep that random. And then instead of having the group initiative so they don't all go at the same time, I'm going to just turn it on, which means that it's going to still do automatically roll for their initiative, but they're going to be different numbers. Sometimes they land on the same result. But so that's how you get variation and before you add your encounter. So you have to set these before you add them. Now that I've done that, I'm going to pop up the encounter. And one last thing I wanted to show you is you can pre-place these before you use them. So right now I have 4 nulls. So I do want to actually add, and actually I'm going to reduce this. So instead of 4 nulls, and if I have this unlocked, I can change it to 3. So you can make that adjustment right now without doing anything fancy. If you want to add a different type of creature, then you have to open up the NPCs and drag it over. But in this case, I just took 1 away because I only have 1 character. So I think that this is a little bit of overkills. And then I'm going to hit the refresh button, and it will recalculate the new CR challenge rating and the XP, if applicable. And now I'm going to place these goblins, or gnolls in this case, onto the map. So I'm just going to drag each one of these tokens into a specific area. So I want that one there. And this would be done before the combat, not during, because they'll see these tokens if I do this. So I'll just go ahead and add these there. And that's the position, the starting position they're going to be in. So I'm going to go ahead and lock the encounter now that I have it adjusted and fixed the way I want. I have all my settings in the combat tracker set. So I'm going to go back over those. So what I did is in the combat area, I changed the numbering system to random, so we can't predict the strength of the encounter, at least in quantity. And then the actual NPC rolls, variable or fixed, I have it on variable because I want them to do different damages. I don't necessarily want them to all do the same exact damage. And then in the house rules, in the house rules, I went ahead and changed this here so that the characters, or the NPCs in this case, will get random hit points. So now when I go to add these over here, there's going to be some variation. It's not going to be as predictable. So I'm going to go ahead and hit the down arrow. And what you'll see is you'll notice that these are not highlighted anymore, not visible. When you close this before you put it on the combat tracker, these NPCs will disappear. So let me show you how that works. So I'll go to menu again, delete. I'm going to delete the the non-friendlies. Okay, so if I close this encounter and I haven't sent it over to the combat tracker yet, once I close that, these creatures that I had on there will disappear. And then when I bring the encounter back up, and once I hit the down arrow and they're already placed on here, they'll go back to where I had them. So there they are. And they're not visible yet. So they're just ready to go for when your players get close enough or in range, then you can execute your plan for the encounter. So that's just a way to vary what you're doing and give it a little bit more realism. So now if you look over here at the combat tracker, Knoll number 5, which there's actually only 3, has 21 for initiative and 20 hit points. It's pretty strong. So Knoll number 8, again, there's only 3, has initiative 13 with 19 hit points, and Knoll number 1 has initiative of 3 with 20 hit points. So these guys have a lot more hit points than they normally would starting off, but there's only 3 Knolls. So, you know, give or take, there's a little bit of balance and imbalance there, but you get the idea. The other thing is movement. So if you lock the table or lock the movement, it prevents players from just randomly moving. So generally what I'll do for that is once you unlock the map, if you look here on the menu for the play mode, there's the toggle lock, or if you click on this little toggle toolbar, there's also a lock here which turns on the locking mechanism. Now this isn't locked for you as the GM, so if you move anything around, you can do that, no problem. GM has full control. There's no limits, anything like that. So you can move things around if you need to. Now, if you want to simulate player movement as the GM, you do have to hold down the Alt key and then left click and drag the token to initiate the movement. So if you click on this token and I have the Alt key held down, once I initiate the movement, it starts that process of actually showing where in the movement this particular NPC is. So she can fly 30 feet per turn. So she's flying here. And as you can see, I don't have to change. I don't even have to keep holding the key down. And if I think that's a good move or she's not running into obstacles, I'll go ahead and approve it. She can also change her waypoint. So as long as it doesn't exceed 30, she can move the waypoints. So she can go this way instead of, coming from this way. So it just depends. So I think that's what she'll do is she'll fly up here and then come down on her turn. So she is the first one on the combat tracker. And when it's her turn, once she moves that distance, I'm going to go ahead and approve it. And there she goes. So she's kind of fluttering around. She comes to the bridge, stops. She's kind of senses maybe there's something wrong. Maybe I gave her some clues. Maybe she doesn't even know they're there, but she's going to make a skill check, which is perception. So if you remember earlier, I actually took the skill check and I put it in the hotkeys. So I'd ask that player to make a perception check, or maybe I would roll it behind the scenes so they wouldn't know. So if the Knolls are hiding, I would roll a stealth check for them. So they don't really, I don't think they have stealth as a trait. No, they don't. So I would just have them roll a dexterity check in the dice tower. So let's say just drag and drop in the dice tower. They're trying to be stealthy. They have a total of 13. So if our passive perception on here is higher than that, we would notice the Knolls were there, but we didn't. So that's something that you can decide, before the encounter starts. So if that's the case, then what I would do if I really want to give them a chance to discover the Knolls before the encounter starts, I could ask for a perception check, but what that might do is warn the party that there's something coming. So there is something to that. So what you can do is in the party sheet, if I bring up the party sheet, you can actually roll behind the scenes. So if I'm in the main tab and I have the skill that I want to use, so in this case, perhaps it's perception, and I can do this for the whole group. And then the DC challenge rating is just 13 that we rolled for the Knolls. So that's the challenge rating. So I can click on this. I can also hide the result. So now I can roll it. And if I had more than one character, it would roll for everyone. So she rolled a 20 and added her bonus. So she got a 22. So she knows there's something there. And also, I'm going to remove the wounds from her, just in case. So she's like, uh-oh, something's there. So that would be a way to do it, or the whole group would know, or something like that. And that's a way you can roll for the entire group. And you can roll it behind the scenes so that they don't automatically know there's something going on. But if she was going to roll and I asked her for it, then all she'd have to do is drag and drop this skill from their toolbar to the dice tower. And roll in a dice tower. She rolled a 1, so she failed. So she got distracted by another butterfly or something, and she basically missed the cues. But, maybe there's an overwhelming smell and the wind changed direction or something like that. So nonetheless, that's how you would resolve that part. And then you'd roll your initiatives, and maybe these guys would get a surprise round if they were hidden, whatever. But that's just to let you know kind of how this works in regards to the settings and to the combat tracker and to the map. Also, in the options, you have the ability to change the movement type. Now, each rule set's a little different, but in the house rules, you can change the diagonal distance. So I have it set to 1.5. So what that means is if I move this character 30 feet diagonally, so I'm going to hold down the Alt key and drag this, even though it's going crazy here, this is 30 feet essentially. So that's a diagonal movement, or actually if I even go more so, like this. So that's a diagonal movement. So if I change the number here to raw, it's actually 29.2, so that's an exact movement there. If I change it to default, that's only 25 feet, so they're going to probably want to move further. So it changes for every other square when you change it to 1.5. So this is default. Now if I go to 1.5, look where they're actually moving 40 feet. So that's because of the Pythagorean theorem. The two short sides, 1.5 times the length of the long side. So when they go diagonally, that's essentially the long side. So they're moving an extra 10 feet. So if that's the case, I'd hit this X to cancel it. Make sure that I have the diagonal distance on. Once I set that, I don't normally move that around. Once I do that and she makes the move, then it will actually calculate correctly based on diagonal movement as well. So now when I move that to that area, it's not moving too far away. So she might fly over here for cover or something like that. So she has partial cover behind that tree. And then her action, we're going to assume that she suspects something's going on, even though she failed her rolls utterly. It doesn't mean she can't go over there. So she's flying around investigating above the river, and she claims that she's going to be ready to get out of the way or to spring into action. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to have her do the dodge action. So if you were going to do that, you can actually take a condition from the effects options, and then there's a condition here, or you can type dodge in the combat tracker. So if I wanted to, I can go to the effects and I can add a line and just type dodge. It only lasts for 1 round. So that's how you could do that with the keyword if you wanted to. You want to automate it a little bit. So once I've done, now she has the dodge effect. It only lasts 1 round. So that's something you can do. You can also code that on their sheet if you want. But nonetheless, that's what her turn is going to be. Is basically she's going to explore over here. She doesn't know the gnolls are there, but she's behind this tree, so that will give her a +2 in cover or a -2 for the attack rolls against her. So that's her turn. She's going to go ahead and pass her turn. Okay, so now the gnoll. So if you notice right now, it's hard to see. The gnolls, I believe, if I open this up, they do have dark vision. The reason it doesn't show like that is because I don't have the token claimed. So even with the combat tracker moving to the next token, it does not change the view. So if I'm going to want to see what this null actually sees, I have to click on the token. So now that I have it clicked on, I can see kind of an idea of what he can see. So he can't really see Kalula, and she has cover. So she's going to be a -5 to hit, but he's going to go ahead and chuck his longbow. He's going to pull it out and shoot kind of blindly through the leaf. So I'm going to target her just so I don't even need to target her, because right at this point he's just shooting blindly. So I'm going to go ahead and click on the -5 modifier down here, which allows for just a temporary modification to the attack roll. And then I'm just going to drag and drop the attack roll either into the combat tracker on top of her entry, or I can do it on the map. So I'll do it in the combat tracker. So I'm just going to take this longbow attack roll and drag it to her. It also rolled at disadvantage because she was dodging, and he had a -5. He also rolled a 1, so I think he dropped his bow, to be honest. And that was a total foobar. So now she's aware that he's there. So I'm going to make him visible. Matter of fact, I'm going to make all of visible. The element of surprise is gone now. So he basically screwed that roll up. So not a very good attempt. Now when I hit the down arrow again on the left, goes to the next combatant. Now again, if I want to see what this null sees, I don't want to leave it on this one down here. I want to click on that token. It's not really much of a change, but it does change the direction of the shadow. So I'll just show you. So from the last token, he couldn't see her at all. However, from this viewpoint, he does have a little bit of a view of her. So if I hold down the right control key and I click on my target, that's going to show the waypoint, 55-foot range. There is some cover there, so it's only going to be -2 because she's not totally behind a tree. She's not blocked. Line of sight isn't, making such an impact. It's just the branches are kind of in the way. So this time I'm just going to double click because I already have her targeted, and he can actually kind of see her. So now I'm going to double click on the longbow attack roll. She's in the dodge state right now, so she dodged that out of the way, we'll just say. And essentially, he missed. So she's just kind of fluttering around and dodging, so he lost out. I didn't even add the -2, so he failed utterly. So I want to remove the dodge effect because I think it only works for one. And now I'm going to go to the next null, which is this guy over here. So when you look between, I'm going to zoom this in. Actually, I'm going to expand this. There we go. So now you get a better look at this. So what I'm doing now is I'm going to take and, so if I click on this null, this is the vision. If I click on this null, that's his vision. And if I click on this null, that's his vision. So you got to click between the combatants. The combat tracker does not do that for you. And that's a big problem I've noticed with a lot of, especially if you're new to this, kind of get lost as to where you're at. So clicking on a token will change the view. Another thing that can happen is if you click on it again, that deselects. So you don't have anything selected right now. That's why there's no shadows and such. But if you actually click on a token, in this case, this null number 1, you'll start seeing the shadow in that. And that's something you got to remember as the game master. Because you're also controlling the map, you're controlling the players, you're controlling everything. It can get very, very confusing. So she's also behind a structure. He knows that she's there, but he doesn't see her and she has cover. So I'm going to click on -5. And I'm just going to drag and drop the attack roll. This time I'm just going to drag it on her token. You almost got her, but you just shot through the trees, hit some branches, and some leaves went flying, and she didn't even come close to her. So that's the first round. So now when I hit the down arrow in the next, it'll be turn complete or next actor, it'll go to Tallulah. Or Kalula. So what she's going to do now is I think she's going to try to hide. So I'm going to have her roll her stealth check. Again, that was a skill that I bookmarked down below. So I don't have to switch on the character sheet. So she moves into position and tries to hide. That's her turn. She's going to stay still and try not to be, make herself so noticeable. So what she'll do is she'll stay hidden around the shadow of this tree, and then potentially she might end up doing like a sneak attack or something, provided that there is another person next to one of these assailants here, or one of these bad guys. So if that was the case, and there was one of the allies was next to this knoll, she could potentially hide and then target that knoll. So let's pretend that there is another character there helping her. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and allow for her to do the sneak attack. So she's going to make her normal attack, and it is going to be -2 because she is behind that tree, because she has cover. But she's hidden, so it's going to be at advantage, and she's got the, he doesn't know she's there, essentially. We'll do that. So she's at a -2 to hit, but she has advantage on the roll because she's hidden. So I'm going to go ahead and hold the right control key and target. So I need to switch view, and then I need to target that individual. See, I have to shoot straight through that tree. So she's kind of small, and she has a smaller preview, and maybe she can shoot through the branches. I don't know. But nonetheless, she still has a -2, and she has advantage. So now if I double-click on her attack roll on her character sheet, it hit. So you can see here, she rolled with advantage. It dropped an 8, so she would have missed if she hadn't had advantage. But it did connect, so it goes flying through the bushes. It doesn't get stopped. Buries itself into this knoll. She can hear it howling. She can't really see too well. I mean, she can see the kind of the form, but she can't really see details. But she hears this thing howling in pain. And I'm going to apply the sneak attack extra damage. So she gets an additional D6 or 2d6 because she's level 3. And that just adds the effect or the additional dice in this case. And then what I'm going to do is apply the damage. So all I have to do is double click on this 1d6 plus 3 piercing. And then Fantasy Grounds will look at the effect and say, okay, and then add 2 more dice to it. So I'm just going to double click on her attack roll. Actually, I don't even have to double click, I don't think. Yeah, I do. Okay, so to double click, it adds all of those extra dice plus a regular damage dice. So all in all, it did 9 points of damage to the knoll. And it looks like the knoll's hurting pretty bad. So he's howling and jumping up and down and screaming for help. So basically, this is just the sort of thing I wanted to show, like for variation and also some of these problems that can come up during a combat. So that's essentially what I wanted to go over today. It was a little bit of the combat tracker and a little bit of, how to set up those settings if you want to change them and what they mean. And then also there's a couple things I wanted to mention, like, switching between the view of different tokens. So if I leave it like that and I'm trying to use, if I go to the next knoll, yeah, it moves and it highlights it, but I'm not looking through the eyes of the knoll. I'm still looking through Kalula. So I need to change that so I can actually look through that particular character. The other thing you notice is that the map moved. So if you don't want the map to move after you've centered it, so if I go back and recenter this, I don't want it to move. So there's an option in the options menu, which is independent of each table. Each person can change this. So in the per user part, there's a turn auto center map. So I'm going to turn that off. So now when I switch targets or switch NPCs or players, it's not going to move the map. So that's nice. The other thing I wanted to mention was that you're looking through the eyes of different NPCs. So to have the lighting show properly, you got to make sure it's turned on in the options. So if I unlock this, you want to make sure that this disable player vision is on or off, depending on how you want to run your game. You need to have line of sight on. You need to have the lighting on. And then if you want the token lock, you can also set it there too. So that's important to have those on. If those aren't on, you won't see any of these shadows, or the occluders won't work. They'll be able to walk through walls. So make sure those are on. That's a common mistake too. And then on top of that, for a troubleshooting thing, every once in a while you'll have a player that'll connect to the table, and for some reason they can't engage or they can't do anything with their token. Like they go to click on it and they can't move, or maybe they can see things they shouldn't. Whatever it is, somehow the link between the combat tracker and the token was broken somehow. Usually it's because you were in the middle of a combat, you get out of Fantasy Grounds, you save it, and then in the interim before your next session you update Fantasy Grounds, and then you come back to your session and you're trying to play, and the one player is going, well, I can't move my token anymore, or something's wrong. Just right click and delete the token from the combat tracker, just this one, and then re-add it. That usually fixes it, and that you don't have to change anything here. You just re-add it to the map. That sometimes will reestablish the broken link there. Once in a while, though, you do have to remove the player entirely and then put them back on the combat tracker. The only thing is you want to take a screenshot so you know what their initiative was and the turn order and all that stuff. So she has 2 things targeted here. So I'm going to clear those targets. But when you come back to the table, you might want to have those retargeted. So there's some setup there. If you try to remove any players in the middle of combat, it's not a good idea. But if you absolutely have to, take a screenshot of it so you can set everything back the way it was. That's the most extreme case. And then the other thing is you can have them disconnect from Fantasy Grounds and then reconnect. And sometimes that'll clear it too, because their cache file gets corrupted somehow. So that's just a troubleshooting tip from me to you that I've seen quite often from users that cannot control their token. It's usually something got broke in there in the interim. And every once in a while, an antivirus or firewall issue will pop up where they have to re-allow Fantasy Grounds through their firewall on their computer. But that's another networking thing. But anyways, hopefully this is helpful. I don't know how much of this you knew or don't know. I'm just showing you some things that are common with combat that generally get messed up or people have problems with. So I think that's essentially going to be all I have for today. This will be on YouTube. The map that I'm using is from Kris Mc Dermott of Game Tile Warehouse, the Venmire Woods pack. It's available on the Fantasy Grounds store. They do not have line of sight on them, so I had to put this on myself. But if you look at the logo when you buy the maps and such, it'll have a little LOS symbol. So in this case, I had to put the grid and the map on myself, which I don't mind doing. This wasn't too bad. Just a few trees and some water. So it wasn't that horrible. But nonetheless, most of the maps in the store have line of sight. This is a third-party map set, and this was created long before Unity came out. So that's why it's not set up already. But then I'm also using the 5e Ruleset in my library. If I go to my library over here, I have quite a bit of books loaded here. I have let's see, for modules. Yeah, so I have some of the Rob 2e coding effects. I have these rule sets here. And the reason I have so many things loaded, which I normally wouldn't, is because I was building a character. When I'm not building characters, I would probably have most of these disabled, except for maybe the player's handbook, maybe this conditions and effects, and maybe one of the other books. But I don't really need to have all these unless I am creating characters. Bye-bye.